This is the Authority Company podcast, in-depth conversations with leaders that are designing our future. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila. And can ancient philosophy help us not only survive, but thrive during the AI revolution? Well, Jack Myers seems to think so. Jack is a media ecologist, speaker, and advisor to brands like GM and Disney, and he's world-renowned for his ability to navigate disruption. We're going to talk about his new book, The Tao of Leadership, and find out how we can unlock our full potential in the age of artificial intelligence. Jack Myers, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Joe, it's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And so, since Jack, I am a middle-aged white man, I have embraced Stoicism over the last few years and Stoic principles, done a lot of reading on Marcus Aurelius and such, but I don't want to get into Stoicism with you, but I want to talk about like ancient philosophies. And why do you think they've withstood the test of time? Because obviously your book uses ancient philosophies in terms of technology and business, but why do you think a lot of these philosophies have just endured hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of years in our life?
Well, my book is called The Tao or Tao of Leadership. So in the AI era. So I'm going back 3,000 years in history. And because I make the connection between humanity and technology, I wanted to go back to Taoism and see what the principles were, but what was the conflict that was happening that led to Taoism? And it was two dynasties that were in direct conflict. And one was very humanistic, the successful one, the one that led to the evolution of Tao, the creation of Taoism 3,000 years ago, the Shang dynasty versus the Zhou dynasty, and basically it was that conflict. While it wasn't technology as we know it today, it was the conflict between the role and responsibility and independence of the human spirit. And I think that's what has continued to bring, whether you go back to Greek philosophers, Socrates, Plato, or go forward to the Renaissance when the printing press, Gutenberg's printing press, led to the Renaissance and the birth of knowledge and intelligence, really, and Leonardo da Vinci. And you jump forward to Steve Jobs and Apple, and his integration and merger of creativity, which is part of that human spirit and technology. And you just saw that constant dynamic between technology in the broader context and humanity and humanistic realities that have been the drivers and the sustainability of Taoist thought. And I don't refer to Stoicism. That's an interesting connection. We could talk about that, but I'm more interested in that kind of conflict that you identify so well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, trust me, I don't want to do a deep dive in Stoicism. I've read enough about it, and the one thing I've always clung with Stoicism is just this idea of you can't control what you can't control. Like and it's a great way to live because I think we all get caught up in things that are completely out of our control, and so that's what Stoicism teach you. So in terms of like
I
going back,
want to jump in there, Joe.
yeah,
I'll let you go, but that's too important a point to not to follow up on, with the point that when there are things you can't control in the world we're living in today, what we can't control is the acceleration of technological change, but we can control the human response and how we go forward, and that's where I focus.
nice, very nice. And so when you were doing your research on Taoist philosophy, what were some of those that you were like almost had, I don't want to say like your eyes bugged out of your head, or was there something that was like that surprised you that like, oh my God, that's like literally happening right now? Like was there something along this journey while you were writing the book where you were like the parallels were almost like freakishly similar?
Yes, exactly. That's exactly actually what happened. Was I wrote I knew that I wanted to write a book about the speed of innovation, the speed of change, the birth of creativity with every advance in technology, and how outdated and outmoded today's uh, organizational structure is within corporations, and how leaders have been focused on really advancing outdated organizational models. I wanted to write all that. And I also knew that having studied Taoism somewhat, but not being all that familiar with it, I knew the metaphor for for the path or the way. The Tao is the path, the way, and so I knew I wanted to write the path of leadership, the blueprint for leadership. So I knew the Tao of leadership is what I wanted, and I wrote the book along those guidelines, but not really looking back at the religious or spiritual context. And then after I wrote the book, I said, all right, I've got to validate my respect for Taoism and the profound wisdom that Taoism represents. And I went back and basically I started studying it, and I realized that the five core principles of Taoism are the exact five core principles that I built my book around. I didn't have to change literally one word, just a little organizational and an added couple of chapters at the beginning. And those are essentially harmony, stability, balance, flexibility, and integrity. And each of those marry up to a principle that I outline in my book that reflects how do you build humanity into your organizational structure and system and leadership model.
Wow, that's so cool. God works in mysterious ways if you believe in the man upstairs. That's pretty wild. So of the four core leadership principles, I want to dig into simplicity because I've been on this high horse of, man, we love to overcomplicate things, and then when we find a simple solution, let's make that simple solution more complicated. Tell us about the idea of simplicity in leadership.
Well, simplicity is actually kind of a macro view that lies on the five core principles that I mentioned. Simplicity is the outcome or the goal is to find a simple model to be able to achieve very complex goals. So simplicity being the opposite of complexity, and complexity being the challenge that most organizations are navigating and managing, and that leaders have to develop. When you look at each of the five principles, stability, flexibility, harmony, integrity, balance, each one has a goal of achieving simplicity built into it. So I look at simplicity more as a macro goal that you only achieve at the end of a process, which is focused not on achieving simplicity, but addressing complexity. And once you address complexity through the five principles and essentially taking a very humanistic approach to empathy and intuition and ingenuity as being guidelines for how you build your solution to complexity, you reach that nirvana of simplicity.
Awesome. I love that. All right. So let's give the boomer some love because, as you know, Jack, over the last few years, they've been an easy target for everybody. The catchphrase "Okay, boomer," and the idea of, like, these folks are just they're slowly growing out of the workforce. But in the book, you talk about the connection between Gen AI and boomers. Let's dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, and I call Gen AI the Nexus generation. They're the first generation to be born with AI, with machine intelligence as a collaborator or partner that they'll have throughout their whole lives, just as Gen Z has been born into the internet and has had the internet and mobile, and it changes the DNA. And yeah, I talk about the not the conflict of the generations, and at each generational level. Uh, Boomer, Gen X, Gen Y, millennials, Gen Z, you have really a different connection to technology. So for boomers, the television was the big technology, and then we had the fragmentation with cable. So we're very uh, I think naive in our fundamental understanding of how technology impacts on our lives, and many of us are still operating in kind of that linear world of linear television, linear media. We operate in a linear society where things are progressed along a linear production line of development or change. None of that is accurate anymore. Those being born into a world of machine intelligence have a different, very different fundamental view that everything is happening right now, everything is changing right now, everything is new right now. I don't give a lot of I am a boomer. I've been a boomer my whole life. I was born in in the early days of the boomer generation. I really think bo- there are parallels between Gen Z and boomers in that uh, in our teens and early 20s we were pro civil rights, anti war as a generation. We were the love generation. We were the age of Aquarius, which is actually just starting this year, the real age of Aquarius with the real reallocation of the planets. Um, but nonetheless, we became capitalists as soon as the opportunity to be more successful than our parents. Today's generations are the first not to be more successful wealthy than their parents, why we have this huge issue over transfer of wealth and many other things. But the reality is that we gave up on our principles. And the challenge that I give to society, culture today, and that I think media especially has failed at, is being true to our fundamental core principles. And that's why I have 5 core principles that guide me and guide my book.
That's nice. That's awesome. In the book, you mentioned Neil Postman's ideals, and I want to, and since we're talking about generations, preparing the next generation and educating them for this world of AI and in a collaborative world. What are some of those initial steps looking like in terms of the education piece? Because I think because of the ubiquitousness of a lot of these LLMs like a ChatGPT and Claude, I feel like people think they know how to do it. And Jack, you may remember this. Like I remember when social media blew up like 20 years ago, when companies started building social media teams, they just look for like the youngest person in the office, and they're like, "Oh, you're you're 21. That means you know social media, so you're gonna run our social media for." But just because you know how to use ChatGPT doesn't mean you're educated on the world of AI. So how do we prepare this next generation of people to use not only use it properly but build it properly?
I teach a class at the University of Arizona, and I've actually been teaching my students how to do effective prompts because they've come into class, even though they're juniors and seniors, without really understanding how to apply ChatGPT or OpenAI or Anthropic or any of the major AI platforms to their work. And I don't think anyone should graduate high school today, graduate grade school. And look, young people being born today are going to have Chat GPT and AI, whether it's through Alexa and Amazon or any other tool coming into the home. They're going to have it their whole lives. So I think it's first of all, you mentioned Neil Postman, who was my mentor, my professor at NYU and media ecologist, and I am a media ecologist. I have been my whole career, and that's really studying the impact of media on culture, society, business, politics, and vice versa. The role of culture, society, politics, business on media. And media, I believe, is such an instrumental vehicle to understand the dynamics and understand, going back to Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message. And that, we really need to understand how media is impacting and influencing every part of our world today and attitudes and society in terms of training and educating. The educational systems have to be changed to become much more embracing of machine intelligence as machine learning as part of a collaborative process, which is going to accelerate dynamically the ability of those going through an educational system to be prepared for the future world, which is heavily weighted toward machine intelligence in the decision making data and analytics process. Uh, so we need to understand algorithms. I teach my students algorithmic theory. I teach them double bind theory. I teach them cultural theory. I teach them transhumanism, posthumanism, the integration of man and machine through biological technology. So uh, these are the things that educators, that every student really needs to have as fundamental as reading, writing, and arithmetic is learning the implications and applications of machine intelligence.
Wow, that's great. You know, it's funny in terms of like the advancements of technology. I'm just trying to think back, and I feel like most breakthroughs that have happened over the course of mankind have been sort of landlocked. Like if you think about it, fire, to be fire, you had to be in one place. Telephone, when you were a kid growing up, the telephone was home. TV, the boomers, you had to go home to watch TV. eh, Even the internet, when it first started, you had to be sitting down at a computer. But now, this idea that our technological breakthroughs are happening in a mobile era where you can do all these things anywhere at any time, how do we connect like our brain to that idea? Because I think that's the one thing, and I've spoken to a lot of people like this, much smarter than me, that I don't think our brains are prepared to handle this much information and at such an ease. Like maybe the next couple generations of kids will be able to do that. But talk about this idea of this technology that is just so mobile and just everywhere that you can't really escape it. Like you kid, like when when your parents punish you from watching TV, that was it. The TV was off and you couldn't do anything. Now you've got this technology everywhere you go.
Joey, there's a lot to unpack there, so I'm going to try. Uh, uh, First thing I want to say is that the brain, our human brain, does not need to process all of that anymore because we're going to have a partner and a collaborator in machine intelligence. It's the machines that are going to be doing the thinking, that are going to be able to absorb, embrace all the data that's going to be pouring into them, and that we can then access easily through through the internet. So that combination, that globalism that Marshall McLuhan in the 60s talked about, the global village. We have a global village today. But I would go back to the light bulb. And when Edison invented just a flickering light bulb, it was place based. It was in the home and it lit up. It allowed your home to go from darkness to daytime by turning on. But all it was to the vast majority of people was a flickering light bulb. And then that flickering light bulb got put into street bulbs. In fact, it got put into street bulbs before it got put into homes because people were afraid it was going to set their home on fire. But they didn't, no one saw the vision of the microwave oven, the electric car. They didn't see that future. Today, what's happening is that when there are inventions, when there's technological advances, the machines have the intelligence to take it forward more quickly, to help the world and humans understand, okay, this technology has just been developed. Machine intelligence is going to be able to say, here's where it's going to take us. So machines know where they're going to be in 50 years. Machine intelligence know what AI is going to look like and what its impact on humanity is going to be in 50 years. So that dynamic leaves leaders to a much different set of responsibilities. It's not to have the brain process the technology, it's to process the impact on humans and how we respond and move humans along on that developmental curve to help with a focus on the humanistic aspects. How do we approach the reality of corporate consolidation, the breakdown of organizational silos from a humanistic, empathetic point of view? And how do we go back to the five core principles of Taoism: flexibility, harmony, stability, balance, integrity, approaching the advance of technology through that prism as opposed to the prism of, oh my God, what do we do with this technology?
Wow, and speaking of the future, you outline a 2050 vision, and you're from reading sounds like you're pretty optimistic about it. So, without spoiling it for the reader, just give us an overview in terms of your optimistic future in 30 years from now.
You know, most writers take an apocalyptic or a dystopian view of the future, which I do in the book. Also, I have something called Bizarro 2050 that looks at the future from a more dystopian point of view. But most of my book takes a very positive view, and in fact, I'm working on my next book right now, which is about the Nexus generation, and it takes place in 2050 and looks back at the past 30 years, going back to the to the introduction of OpenAI in 2022. So I'm having fun with that question of what does the world look like in 2050, and it's a world where those being born today are emerging, have emerged as the leaders. They are the 20 and 25 and 30-year olds who you look at and say, wait, we're 21, let's put him in the decision making room. And I can't help but respond to your comment on the 21-year-olds and the 19-year-olds that are going into our governmental organizations led by Elon Musk. And I'm not going to say whether that's positive or negative. What I am going to say is what they're going in with is machine intelligence, machine learning, open AI, maybe because they're working with Elon, not open AI, but with high active media and media intelligence, marketing intelligence, and organizational intelligence that they're not bringing in. They're bringing in the technology that's able to look at it. So I have I'm not in favor of a lot of things that are happening, but what I am in favor of is looking at our organizational models and saying we need to rebuild, restructure them. And that's what my book is about.
Love that. That's good. It's funny. I was just thinking about the fact that I think the only thing that could screw up AI, and this is my take, is capitalism. Because if you look back at even the idea of social media companies, like in theory, social media companies were built on the concept of connecting people around the world. What a wonderful idea. And then all of a sudden these social media companies realize, we need to find a way to keep people on our platform so we can make more money out of it. And hence you've seen the rise of algorithms and the idea that negative content gets heightened and watched and clicked more. So that's my worry when it comes to AI. Like, what is how is capitalism going to screw up this idea? I mean, I know there's 100 ways of, like, you hear.
Wow, Joe, I laughed when you said that because my very first book was a book called Ad Bashing: Surviving the Attacks on Advertising, 1993. And advertising was the government wanted to tax it. Now they want to tax it again. But it had very low advertising had very low perceptions as both either a career or very low respect, still does. Uh, but fundamentally, my very first chapter of that book said uh, media is at the core of capitalism and advertising is at the core of media. If we attack advertising, we're attacking media, we're attacking capitalism. And then the rest of the book was here's what we do to support advertising. Now, if I had to rewrite that book today, I'd say let's kill advertising because if advertising is at the core of media and media is at the core of capitalism, and I think media has failed in its responsibilities that defined it in its early days, especially of television, where there were actually public interest, convenience, and necessity was self-regulation. It no longer operates in the world of public interest, convenience, or necessity. It works in the world of capitalism and profitability, and it's been proven to be a pretty destructive force, which goes back to Neil Postman and his book "Amusing Ourselves to Death: Public Discourse in the Age of Entertainment," which of showbiz, where he basically talks about how news and entertainment are going to intersect because of television, and he foresaw the internet. So yeah, capitalism is at the core of a lot of the challenges, and I think we're looking, and a lot of what we're dealing with in the world today is really a challenge between organizational structures that are built on capitalism and organizational structures that are built on humanistic values and principles. And again, that's where I focus my attention.
Yeah, and I want to say, Jack, I know we're getting to know each other. I'm not a communist. I'm a big fan of capitalism, but I think I'm one of those people, like, look at the negatives.
I'm in it with this book to be successful, and profitability is not something that I don't believe in, but I do believe that there are principles of just humanity that are being left behind in the drive toward capitalism. And I think we also make a mistake that if we think that there are attacks on our organizational structure, our governmental structure, our capitalistic models, that's not the case at all. It's integrating the human realities into those that understanding and those dynamics.
Nice, nice. It's funny. Jack, every once in a while, I like to poke fun at Jim Collins's book, Good to Great, because if you were to pick it up now and read it, most of those companies that he details like went from good to great are out of business. So I always like to joke about like, well, I guess they're not that great if they didn't stand this time. And in your book, you write about the downfall of Kodak. And so let's connect this with companies not getting on this bandwagon of AI. I mean, it's funny. I have a friend of mine who's in technology. And you know what drives him crazy, Jack? When someone says, if you're a business today, you've got to be a technology business. And he's like, no, you're not. You may use technology, but you're not a technology business. So let's talk about how companies cannot be left behind, like Kodak was, in this AI revolution.
And the analogy or the metaphor I make with Kodak is really I make put it in human terms, and I introduce a couple of characters, Sarah and Jake, in my book, who one of both of whom are born into the internet or Gen Z, and our one is born into a home where she's encouraged to have technology. They have the internet right at the beginning. She's a gamer, and then Jake grows up in a less privileged home, or and doesn't have all those advantages, and therefore, as they evolve, go to school, go to college, he's constantly being left behind while she's constantly advancing, and I make that connection between successful companies like Kodak and companies like Apple, which take a very different point of view toward investment in emerging technology and the creation of technology. Kodak was one of the first to have the internet connected camera, and just thought, well, that's going to ruin photography as an art. Well, you see that the art is now being made with the Apple phone. So, and then what's interesting, I take Sarah and Jake forward to 2050 in the book, and I show how that parallels up 30 years from now when they're leading companies and working in companies. So I kind of make that connection to okay, now where's that kind of difference of those who invest early. Because I've spent my whole career in the media, related to the media industry, I also recognize that when you look at the leaders, the most profitable companies today in the media business, it's Amazon Prime, it's Apple, it's Netflix, it's companies that reinvented, and they're the ones investing in AI and machine intelligence. And then you look at Disney, Comcast, NBCU, Paramount, Fox, who are continue to be my primary clients, but who have failed every step of the way to invest in that next wave of technology, and they failed to invest in AI.
And do you think, Jack, people will be almost like wait and see, but not wait too long? Because you mentioned these companies that maybe will use AI, but they probably don't want to invest in the front end of it. It's sort of like, when the streaming wars happened years ago, all these companies were just putting boatloads of money in it, and Wall Street just saw that as, oh, that's a good sign. And then I often joke, Jack, that one day Wall Street will come and say, like, yeah, but are you making any money with all those investments? And then all of a sudden, the great Netflix correction happens. So there is a fine line to it, right? About like how much you want to invest now, as opposed to just waiting to see what will actually help your company.
I have a chapter in my book called "Build Portals, Not Bridges." Bridges take time. They're an evolution. You go along the bridge from the past to where you see the future, and you can assess risk, and you can test, and you can develop. We don't have time to build bridges with technological change happening as quickly as it is. You don't. Netflix didn't build a bridge from the going to digital, from the internet streaming, and to streaming. They built a portal. They did it. They made that decision that this is the business we're in. We're going to evolve out of that business. Whereas other companies like the companies I just named were very slow to the streaming process, didn't adapt early, waited. Uh, I think you can see today, you can be a sponge, you can take the thing generational, technological, biological, you can take what's happening in society and culture, in business and in technology, and you can say this is where it's likely to head. It's not a problem that they're afraid that the future may not be successful. Wall Street won't allow them to let go of their past too radically. So they're forced to hold on to their past far too long before and then once they get to that point where you say, okay, now we got to invest, it's costing them billions of dollars more than they would have had to pay. And if you look at the market cap of legacy media in the aggregate, the linear media broadcast and cable networks, and you look at their market cap, it doesn't even equal the market cap of OpenAI, or of Apple, or of Microsoft, or even of Amazon. These are companies that are their competitors. They're unable to compete today.
Do you think, Jack, we get to a point where we have to come to the realization that not everything is a growth business? So, like, I cut my teeth, Jack. I spent most of my adult life working in radio, and for many years, it did very well. And then mid 2000s, technology comes around, and then all of a sudden, it's no longer a growth company. But my station was owned by Disney, and Disney's like, we're getting out of that. We're selling all our radio stations to a radio company. And then all of a sudden, TV was a growth business because of cable. And then because of streaming, it's no longer a growth business. It makes money, but it's not a growth business. So how do you handle that? Like come to realization of like one's gonna, a company. There's gonna be companies that make money, but then there's companies that gonna make money and continue to grow and make money. That it's very confusing, I think, for most people to kind of wrap their brain around that because you'll see a lot of these major companies. I predict, Jack, in the next 5-10 years, most of these major companies like a Disney and Paramount, they're not going to be want to be involved in over the top television. They'll be like, have someone else do that because that doesn't grow. So tell me about that distinction between making money and growing.
I think most companies that are not in a growth category already realize that and are grappling with how they navigate and manage that and don't know how, because the investment in that future is it's already taken. The competitive set has already been built. What's the next step? Where do you go beyond that? Where's this headed? Is where they're really unable, to they're locked. They're locked and they can't go in any direction. They can't go forward. They can't go backward. They can only navigate today's realities. And that's a zero sum game for them. And that's the reality so many companies are in today. I think everyone who's an entrepreneur doesn't become an entrepreneur unless they see the growth opportunity. So I don't think the pattern of growth, it's how do we take legacy business models and uh, survive by understanding and recognizing. And the only way you do that is what I call the blueprint of leadership, which is to break down the silos that are epidemic within organizations, consolidate across capabilities and categories, shrink dramatically your overhead, far more far more than companies have already done, where they're cutting into muscle. So that means you got to identify the muscle that's no longer functioning and working for you and focus on where do you put your emphasis. Most importantly, use technology, invest in technology to do the redundant tasks, and focus on where your people and relationships of people and can make a difference and build a people-based business rather than a technology-based business.
Love it, love it, love it. All right, so Jack, I love to wrap up these conversations, taking folks behind the dedication of the book. And among the people you dedicate your book to is to my dad, Dave Myers, who inspired me to write and much more. Tell me about you and your dad and why it was important to have him. You dedicate the book to a bunch of people, but dad's the top. Dad gets top billing.
Number one, yeah. Well, what's interesting is I wrote a book called The Future of Men and gave it a TED Women talk called The Future of Men, has over 1 million views, and I dedicated it to my mom. So I dedicated The Future of Men to my mom, I dedicated the future of everything to my dad. My dad was an early Mr. Mom. My mom was the only working mother in the community, and my dad was incredibly supportive of that. She went on to become a major computer programmer for the U.S. government, for the Air Force, as a civilian. And my dad again supported it, supported her worldwide travel. I remember sitting with my dad while he ironed clothes, and but he also, was out there playing catch with me and teaching me how to play sports. Um, he he was a big Yankee fan. I'm a big Yankee fan. A lot of what has sustained with me and defined my life and career have been balanced by both my mom and my dad. And I really wanted to recognize, but my dad was the one who did teach me to write. I have behind me an Underwood typewriter. I learned to type. My dad taught, he was a like one, two finger typist. He taught me to type. That's where I began writing. And my dad would spend a lot of time with me because I wasn't a good I didn't know how to write. I had papers due, I couldn't do it. I had to write something fictional, I couldn't do it. And he taught me how to write. So I really give him kind of that foundational responsibility, not just for my writing capability, but for who I am as a human being.
That's awesome. Here's Jack Myers. The name of the book is The Tao of Leadership, Harmonizing Technological Innovation and Human Creativity in the AI Era. Jack, thanks so much for the time. Really appreciate it.
Joe, you're an amazingly good interviewer. Thank you.
Thank you. And that'll do it for this episode. If you'd like to find out more about Jack and our other authors, go to theauthoritycompany.com.